My name is Linda Carter, and the day my daughter called me an embarrassment was the same day she graduated from college. I woke up before the sun came out, not because of an alarm, but because my heart would not let me sleep. For 4 years I had waited for this day. For 4 years I had worked quietly, prayed quietly, and struggled quietly. I stood in front of my mirror holding 2 dresses. One was new and simple, light blue, the other was my old navy church dress. I chose the old one. I did not want attention. I did not want to look like I was trying too hard. I just wanted to see my daughter walk across that stage and receive the degree she worked for. When I arrived at the university, the campus was full of life. Families were laughing, cameras were flashing, and proud parents were fixing their children's gowns. I saw my daughter Emily standing with her father, Richard Carter, and his wife, Vanessa. Vanessa looked perfect, confident, and comfortable in that space. Richard stood tall beside her, smiling like a man who had done everything right. I paused before walking toward them. For a moment, I felt like I did not belong there. Emily saw me and walked over. "Mom, you came," she said. I smiled and hugged her. Of course I came. I wouldn't miss this for anything. Her hug was quick, like her mind was somewhere else. Vanessa stepped forward with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes and said, "We're sitting near the front with close family." I nodded quickly and said, "That's okay, I'm fine anywhere." Inside the auditorium, I found a seat in a middle row, but soon an usher tapped my shoulder and said the seats were reserved for immediate family. I told him I was her mother. He checked his list and said there were only 3 seats under her name. 3. I understood without asking questions. I picked up my purse and walked to the back row. As I sat down, I told myself that it did not matter where I sat today. What mattered was that she made it. The ceremony began. Music filled the hall and students walked in proudly. When they called, "Emily Carter," my heart jumped. I stood up and clapped louder than anyone around me. "That's my daughter," I whispered. I watched her cross the stage, shake hands with the dean, and smile for the camera. In that moment, none of the pain mattered. I was proud. After the ceremony, everyone gathered outside for pictures. Families hugged and celebrated. I waited until Vanessa finished arranging her large family photo. Then I walked closer and said softly, "Emily, can we take one together?" She looked around quickly and said, "Maybe later, Mom." I stepped back, but I stayed close enough to hear Vanessa tell the photographer to make sure only close family was in the frame. I felt small, but I kept quiet. Then Emily walked over to me with a serious look on her face. "Mom, why were you walking around earlier? Vanessa's sister saw you trying to sit near the front. It looked awkward." I blinked in confusion. I was moved. Those seats were reserved. She sighed like I had made a mistake. Then she said the words that changed everything. "You embarrassed me today." For a second, I thought I heard her wrong. "Embarrassed you?" I asked quietly. She lowered her voice. "You don't understand how things look. Dad's business partners were here. Vanessa's family was here. You just don't fit into that space." I felt my chest tighten. For years I had worked double shifts. For years I had paid bills late so our tuition could be paid on time. For years I had stayed silent when people assumed her father paid for everything. And now, on the proudest day of her life, I was an embarrassment. I did not shout. I did not cry. I simply nodded and said, "I see." She walked away, back to the group taking pictures and laughing. I stood there holding the small bouquet of flowers I bought for her, feeling like a stranger at my own child's graduation. But as I stood there watching them celebrate, something inside me became very clear. I realized that respect is not about where you sit. It is not about who stands in front. It is about who stood behind the scenes when nobody was watching. And for 4 years, I had stood there quietly. I had made sure every tuition payment was made. I had made sure she never missed a semester. I had sacrificed things she never even knew about. I looked at my daughter laughing with the people she thought carried her to that stage, and I made a decision in that moment. I would not argue. I would not beg for respect. But when the time was right, I would tell the truth. And when the truth came out, everyone would know exactly who paid the price for that degree. If this story is already touching your heart, make sure you subscribe because what happens next will shock you. And before you go, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story reaches. Before that graduation day. It begins 4 years earlier, on a quiet evening in my small kitchen. Emily had just received her college acceptance letter. I still remember the way her hands shook as she opened it. When she screamed with joy and jumped into my arms, I felt like the happiest mother in the world. "Mom, I got in," she cried. I held her tightly and said, "I knew you would." In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the overdue electricity bill on the counter. Not the rent notice in my purse. Not the fact that I had only slept 4 hours after a long night shift. My daughter was going to college. A few days later, the tuition bill arrived. I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the numbers. It was more money than I had ever seen on one paper before. My hands felt cold, but my mind was clear. I told myself one simple thing: she will not lose this opportunity because of money. I called Emily's father, Richard. I asked him if we could sit down and talk about sharing the cost. He sounded calm on the phone. "We'll see what we can do," he said. A week later, he told me that things were tight with his business and that Vanessa had other financial plans. He said he would help, when possible. I understood what that meant. It meant I was on my own. That night, I opened my laptop and looked at my savings. It was not much, but it was a start. I used almost all of it to pay the first deposit. When Emily asked how everything was working out, I smiled and said, "Don't worry about it. Just focus on school." I did not want her to carry stress before her first class even started. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nursing assistant. Some weeks, I worked 6 days. Sometimes 7. I would come home with aching feet and swollen hands, but when I saw Emily studying at the dining table, I felt strength again. I started packing my lunch instead of buying food at work. I stopped getting my hair done at the salon. I cancelled cable TV. Every small sacrifice added up. The first semester passed quickly. When the next tuition bill arrived, I was ready. I had opened a small education account and put money into it every single week. Sometimes it was a large amount. Sometimes it was only a little. But I never skipped a week. Richard called occasionally to ask how Emily was doing. He would tell her how proud he was. He would promise to support her dreams. But when it came to the actual payment deadlines, the responsibility was always mine. I never told Emily that. I never wanted her to see her father differently. During her second year, my car broke down. The repair cost was high. For a moment, I thought about delaying a tuition payment. I sat in the mechanic's office with tears in my eyes, doing the math in my head. Then I made a decision. I sold the car. I began taking 2 buses to work. The trips were long and tiring, but every month the tuition was paid on time. Emily never knew. She thought I just preferred public transport. In her 3rd year, the classes became harder. She would call me late at night feeling stressed. "Mom, I don't think I can do this," she once said. I sat on my bed holding the phone and said, "You are stronger than you think. You will finish." I believed in her even when she doubted herself. I remember one winter evening when I came home exhausted. The heating was low because I was saving money on electricity. I wore 2 sweaters and made a simple dinner. As I ate, I looked at the calendar and circled the next tuition deadline. I whispered to myself, "We are almost there." I did not see my sacrifices as something special. To me, it was simple. I am her mother. It is my job to stand behind her. I never posted about my struggles online. I never complained to friends. When people assumed that Richard and Vanessa were covering the big expenses, I stayed quiet. I told myself that one day Emily would understand. Not because I would tell her, but because life would teach her. By our 4th year, I had taken a small loan to cover the final stretch. Signing those papers scared me, but missing her last semester scared me more. When I made the final tuition payment, I sat in my kitchen and cried quietly. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. Proud that despite every obstacle, every unpaid bill, every long shift, I kept my promise to myself. She would graduate. She would walk across that stage without knowing how close she had come to losing it all. And now, standing there at her graduation after she called me an embarrassment, all those years flashed through my mind. The bus rides. The night shifts. The cancelled dreams. The silent prayers. I realized something important. She only saw the finished product. She did not see the cost. And maybe that was my fault, because I chose silence. But silence does not erase truth. The truth was simple. Every semester was paid. Every deadline was met. Every opportunity remained open because I refused to give up. As I stood there watching her celebrate with the people she believed carried her, I knew one thing for sure. The story was not finished. And very soon, the truth would speak for itself. On the grass outside the auditorium, with laughter floating in the air and cameras flashing like nothing in the world could go wrong. I was still standing near the tree, holding the bouquet of flowers I had bought for Emily. The ribbon around it was slightly loose because I had tied it myself. I watched as Richard placed his hand proudly on Emily's shoulder while Vanessa adjusted Emily's gown for another picture. They looked like a perfect family. From the outside, no one would question who had supported her journey. No one would question who had carried the weight. Sarah Mitchell, Emily's best friend, walked over with a bright smile. "Mr. Carter," she said to Richard, "you must feel amazing paying for all 4 years. That's such a blessing." My ears rang. I was not trying to listen, but the words landed directly on me. Richard gave a small laugh and straightened his jacket. "Well, you know, we do what we can for our children," he replied. Vanessa nodded proudly beside him. "Education is very important in this family," she added. I felt the ground shift under my feet. It was not just that they were accepting praise. It was how easily they accepted it. How natural it sounded. As if the story had always been written that way. Emily smiled at them, her eyes full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. Those words were not meant for me. They were not even looking in my direction. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself that today was not about ego. But something inside me felt heavy, like a door slowly closing. Sarah looked around and noticed me standing alone. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Carter," she said kindly. "You must be so proud too." I nodded. "I am very proud." She tilted her head slightly. "It must have been hard, covering tuition all those years. College is expensive." There was innocence in her voice. She did not know what she was stepping into. Before I could answer, Vanessa gently laughed. "Oh, Sarah, Richard handled that. Linda just came to celebrate." The words were soft, but they carried weight. Just came to celebrate. That was how small my role had become in their version of the story. I looked at Richard. He avoided my eyes. Emily stood there quietly, as if the conversation made her uncomfortable, but she did not correct it. She did not say a word. And that silence hurt more than the accusation earlier. I felt heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Actually," I began, but then I stopped. "Not yet," I told myself. "Not like this. Not in anger." Vanessa stepped closer to Emily and whispered something that made them both smile. The photographer called them again for another group picture. "Immediate family only," he announced. The phrase echoed in my mind. Immediate family. I stepped back once more. As they gathered together, Sarah remained near me. "Mrs. Carter, aren't you joining?" she asked. I gave her a small smile. "It's fine. They have it covered." She looked confused but did not push further. The camera clicked several times. I watched from a distance as Emily held her diploma case proudly. Richard wrapped his arm around her. Vanessa stood close on the other side. It looked complete. It looked balanced. It looked like the story they wanted people to believe. When the photo session paused, Dr. Michael Reynolds, the university dean, walked past greeting families. He had a tablet in his hand and was congratulating students personally. When he reached Emily, he smiled warmly. "Congratulations, Emily. Excellent academic record." She thanked him proudly. He then looked at Richard and Vanessa. "You must be proud. Supporting a student through 4 years is no small thing." Richard nodded confidently. "We're very proud." The words were smooth, almost rehearsed. My heart began to beat louder. I realized something important in that moment. If I walked away now, this version of the story would live forever. Every future dinner, every family gathering, every introduction would carry this same belief. That I was just a guest. That I simply showed up at the end. Emily turned and saw me still standing there. Our eyes met. There was something in her expression now. Not anger. Not pride. Something closer to uncertainty. Maybe even doubt. Perhaps deep down, she realized she had never actually asked who made those payments. She had just assumed. Dr. Reynolds shifted his tablet slightly as if checking names for recognition. My hands felt steady now. The anger had cooled into something else. Clarity. I stepped forward slowly. Not rushed. Not loud. Just steady. Sarah watched me move. Vanessa noticed too, her smile tightening slightly. Richard's jaw stiffened. The air changed, even before I spoke. I did not feel small anymore. I did not feel embarrassed. I felt prepared. For 4 years I had stayed silent. For 4 years I had allowed assumptions to grow. But silence does not mean absence. And sacrifice does not disappear just because it is hidden. I reached the edge of their circle and stood tall. My voice, when it finally came, was calm and clear. "Dr. Reynolds," I said politely, "may I ask you one small question?" The world around us seemed to slow. Conversations nearby faded. Even the wind felt still. I was no longer standing in the back row. I was standing in my truth. And in that moment, I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The kind of silence that makes people stop smiling without knowing why. When I asked Dr. Reynolds that small question, every sound around us seemed to fade. He adjusted his glasses and looked at me kindly. "Yes," he said. My voice was calm, steady, and respectful. "Could you please confirm who made the tuition payments for Emily Carter over the last 4 years? For a brief second, no one reacted. Vanessa's smile froze. Richard's shoulders stiffened. Emily looked from me to the dean, confused. Dr. Reynolds glanced down at his tablet. "Of course," he said casually, as if it were a simple request. He tapped the screen a few times. The seconds felt long. I could hear my own heartbeat, but I was not afraid. I had lived the truth. I did not need to rehearse it. Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat gently. All tuition payments, he read clearly, were made under the name Linda Carter. Every semester was paid in full and on time. The words did not come out loudly, but they landed heavily. Vanessa's hand slowly dropped from Emily's shoulder. Richard's face lost its color. Sarah covered her mouth in shock. Emily blinked as if she had misheard. "What?" she whispered. Dr. Reynolds looked up again, unaware of the storm that had just begun. "Yes, Linda Carter handled all payments. Very consistent record. Very responsible." He smiled politely and moved on to greet another family, leaving us standing there in the open truth. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt different now. Not warm and celebratory, but sharp and real. Emily turned to her father first. "Dad," she asked quietly. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no quick answer this time. Vanessa tried to step forward. "There must be some confusion," she said, forcing a light laugh. Maybe it was processed differently. But even she did not sound confident. I did not raise my voice. I did not look angry. I simply stood there. Emily slowly turned toward me. Her eyes searched my face like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "Mom, you paid?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded once. "Yes." That was all. No speech. No drama. Just the truth. Her eyes filled with tears. "All 4 years?" she asked. "All 4, I replied softly. Sarah looked at Richard again. "Mr. Carter," I thought. She began, but she stopped. There was nothing left to assume. Richard finally spoke, his voice lower now. "I helped where I could," he said weakly. But the strength was gone from his tone. Vanessa crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable. The crowd around us had started to notice the tension. Conversations nearby slowed. People glanced over quietly. Not because we were loud, but because truth has a way of drawing attention without shouting. Emily stepped closer to me. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. That question carried more pain than anger. I looked at her, not as a graduate, not as an adult, but as the little girl who once held my hand crossing the street. "Because it wasn't about credit," I said gently. "It was about your future." Tears rolled down her cheeks now. "I thought Dad and Vanessa," she began, but her voice broke. I shook my head softly. "I never wanted you to feel divided. I wanted you focused on school, not on money." Richard looked down at the ground. Vanessa said nothing. The confidence she had earlier was gone. The picture-perfect image had cracked. Emily covered her face for a moment, overwhelmed. "I called you an embarrassment," she said quietly, her voice shaking. The words hung between us. I stepped closer and placed my hand lightly on her arm. "You didn't know," I said calmly. "But now you do." She looked at me with regret written all over her face. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. I could see it now. The realization. The pieces connecting. The late nights I came home tired. The simple clothes. The old car that disappeared. The quiet life I lived while she studied freely. She was finally seeing the full picture. Around us, people slowly returned to their own celebrations, but something had shifted permanently. Respect does not need to scream. It only needs truth. Sarah stepped forward and hugged Emily gently. "Your mom is amazing," she said softly. Vanessa looked like she wanted to say something, but there were no words that would fix what had already been exposed. Richard finally lifted his head. "Linda," he said, almost cautiously, "you could have told us." I looked at him calmly. "I did not need applause," I replied. "I just needed her to graduate." There was nothing else to argue about. The facts were clear. The record was clean. Every semester. Paid in full. On time. Emily suddenly wrapped her arms around me tightly, holding me longer than she had all day. This time, it was not quick or distracted. It was firm. Real. "Thank you," she cried into my shoulder. I closed my eyes and held her back. For the first time that day, I did not feel small. I did not feel out of place. I felt exactly where I belonged. Behind her success. Supporting her quietly. Loving her without conditions. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were different. Softer. Wiser. "You're not an embarrassment," she said. "You're the reason I'm here." And in that moment, the back row did not matter. The reserved seats did not matter. The pictures did not matter. The truth had taken its place in the center, and everyone had seen it. Later that evening, after the crowd had slowly disappeared and the campus had grown quiet again. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft orange and pink colors. The noise of celebration had faded, but something much deeper had settled in its place. Emily and I were sitting together on a wooden bench near the parking lot. Her graduation gown was folded neatly beside her. For the first time that day, there were no cameras, no proud speeches, no outside voices. Just a mother and her daughter. Emily looked down at her hands for a long time before speaking. "Mom," she said softly, "I feel ashamed." I gently shook my head. "No," I replied. "You feel aware. That's different." She looked at me with red, tired eyes. "All these years, I thought Dad was paying. I thought Vanessa was helping. I even defended them when people questioned it. And you never corrected me." I smiled gently, not with pride, but with peace. "It was never a competition," I said. "It was never about who looked better. It was about making sure you never had to stop." She leaned back against the bench and wiped her face. "But why stay silent? Why let them take the credit?" I took a slow breath before answering. "Because I didn't raise you to love me based on money. I raised you to build your future. If you believed someone else helped you, that didn't change what I did. The goal was always your success." She was quiet again, thinking carefully. "When I called you an embarrassment," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was thinking about appearances. About how things looked. I didn't realize I was ignoring the person who carried me here." I placed my hand over hers. "Life will teach you something important," I said calmly. "The loudest person in the room is not always the one who sacrificed the most. Real support is often quiet." She nodded slowly, understanding settling into her heart. "I promise you," she said firmly, "I will never measure people by how they look again." I smiled. That lesson is more valuable than any degree. There was no anger left in me. Only relief. Relief that the truth had come out without shouting. Relief that my daughter had seen clearly before life hardened her heart. A few minutes later, Richard walked toward us. He looked different now, less confident, more reflective. "Emily," he said gently, "I'm proud of you." She nodded politely but did not stand up. He turned to me. "Linda, I should have stepped up more." His voice carried regret, but I did not respond with blame. "What matters," I said simply, "is that she finished." Vanessa did not come over. Some truths are harder for some people to face. But I did not need apologies from everyone. I had something more important. My daughter's understanding. As we stood up to leave, Emily surprised me. She picked up her gown and then reached for my hand. Not because she needed help walking, but because she wanted to hold it. "Let's take one more picture," she said softly. "Just us." There was no photographer this time. No audience. Just her phone, stretched out in front of us as we smiled together. That picture was not perfect. My dress was simple. My hair was not styled like Vanessa's. But the smile on Emily's face was real. And that made it priceless. On the drive home, she talked differently. She asked questions about the past 4 years. About how I managed the payments. About the extra shifts. About the bus rides after I sold my car. When I told her the full story, she cried again. Not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. "I want to help you now," she said. I shook my head gently. "Your success is already my reward. Build your life. That's enough." Weeks later, Emily received her first job offer. The night she got the call, she rushed into my living room with tears of joy. "Mom, I got it," she shouted. I hugged her tightly, feeling the circle complete. Not because she would now support me financially, but because she understood something deeper. She understood sacrifice. She understood humility. She understood love. And from that day forward, when people congratulated her in front of others and praised her success, she always added one sentence. "I couldn't have done it without my mom." Not loudly. Not to impress anyone. Just truthfully. And that was enough. Sometimes respect does not come immediately. Sometimes it grows after truth is revealed. But when it finally blooms, it feels sweeter than applause. I was never embarrassed to be her mother. And now, she was proud to be my daughter. If this story touched your heart, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss more powerful stories like this. And in the comments, share your own thoughts, lessons, or observations from this story. Tell us what stood out to you and what you learned. Let's keep the space respectful and positive. No insults, just real conversations. I'm reading your comments, and I'd love to hear.